My name is Maris, and for most of my life, I was the one they forgot to mention. My family once said I was too sensitive, too ambitious, too much. Then they stopped saying anything at all. 7 years ago, I left home with a suitcase, a borrowed jacket, and no goodbye. Not a call, not a text. They didn't even tell me when my brother landed in the ICU. But the day I walked into his hospital room, his nurse looked at me, paused, and asked, "Wait, are you the chief doctor?" That moment changed everything, but not for the reason you think. Why didn't they ever want me to become more? And what were they trying so hard to hide? Let me tell you, there's a kind of silence at family parties that doesn't sound like quiet. It sounds like being erased. I felt it that day as I stood near the patio door, sipping ginger ale from a wine glass I didn't ask for. They always handed me something a little off, never quite right, never quite mine. The room was full of laughter, cousins with babies, aunts in pastel blazers, and that god-awful fruit tray that somehow showed up at every family function, like a bad tradition no one had the guts to end. It was Silas's birthday, of course, 35, and somehow still boyish enough that my mother insisted on cupcakes. The table in the dining room was dressed like a wedding. Candles, folded napkins, family photos printed in glossy color. All of them included him. I wasn't in a single frame. My seat was next to the window, where the sunlight made everything uncomfortable. No one looked my way. I used to think I was imagining that. Now I know better. When the moment for speeches came, Dad clinked his glass and stood up tall, pressed shirt, that badge in the heart kind of posture he never lost, even after retiring from the force. "Here's to Silas," he said, looking around the table. "Our pride and joy, our rock. Every family's got one of those. And every family," he paused, smirked, "well, every family has a waste, too." Laughter. Real, unfiltered laughter. Even my Aunt Gloria, who usually had the social tact of a cactus, chuckled and dabbed her eyes. Silas smiled. He didn't look at me. I tried to laugh too, a small one, not enough to sound like I agreed, but just enough to pretend it didn't sting. My mother gave me that look. Tight lips, slight head tilt, eyes that warned, "Don't ruin this." And so I didn't. I never did. The funny thing about being called useless, about hearing it phrased as a joke in front of everyone you share blood with, is that it doesn't hit you like a slap. It seeps in. It makes a home. That word, waste, wrapped itself around me like shrink wrap. I couldn't breathe without tasting it. I left the party early, said something vague about work, though no one asked what I actually did anymore. That week, I had published my first co-authored paper in a respected medical journal on health disparities in underserved communities. At the hospital, people congratulated me, sent flowers. Even my supervising resident clapped when I walked in. But at home, they didn't know, and worse, they wouldn't have cared. I remember my graduation vividly. I bought my own gown off an online clearance rack, tailored it myself with fabric glue and panic. I crossed the stage alone, my name announced in a voice too bright for the empty row in the audience meant for my family. That afternoon, while I sat in a Thai place with 3 fellow interns, I scrolled through Facebook. There was my mother, Delphine, posting like a proud campaign manager, so proud of Silas for his latest award. What a son! A picture below her, Dad, Silas, and even my cousin's baby, all in front of a banner I'd never seen, celebrating something I didn't know he'd done. My name wasn't mentioned, not even as an afterthought. People talk about being invisible like it's poetic. Let me tell you, it's clinical. It's cold. It's sitting in a room full of voices and realizing none of them have said your name in hours, days, years. It's like trying to breathe in a house without windows. I stopped arguing about it years ago. There's no power in demanding to be seen, but there is power in building somewhere else. So I did. I started saving money quietly, incrementally. I took extra shifts, applied for scholarships I never told them about, and stopped waiting for their permission to exist. The last birthday invitation I ever received from my mother, I didn't throw away. I folded it carefully and slipped it into the back of my journal, the same one where I used to write letters addressed, "Dear Home." I stopped writing that word soon after. People say silence is golden. In my family, silence was currency, and they spent it on making sure I knew where I stood, or didn't. The last time they ever invited me to the table, I came holding a suitcase. The last time I stood in front of them, I came holding a suitcase. I thought that would be the last chapter of it all, no more chances to be erased in real time. But life has its own choreography. Sometimes, it dances you back to where you swore you'd never return. It was just a short rotation, 2 weeks assisting outpatient cardiology cases in San Antonio, part of a broader hospital partnership program I volunteered for without even checking the location. The irony hit me the moment I walked through those glass doors. The clinic was sterile and quiet, typical for a Thursday afternoon. I was shadowing Dr. Ningguan that day. Routine intake, medication adjustments, brief consults. We moved room to room, smooth as a practiced rhythm, until room 5. She was already seated, her purse clutched to her chest like a shield, a familiar navy sweater, Delphine's favorite, the one she wore every Thanksgiving. I stopped in the doorway. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just sat there like I wasn't 3 feet away. The nurse beside her gestured toward me. "Dr. Crane will be assisting." "That's not my daughter," Delphine said, eyes locked ahead, calm, cool, like she was explaining the weather. The nurse looked confused. I didn't move. My throat didn't tighten. My chest didn't drop. I simply nodded, took the chart, and confirmed her prescription dose. I explained the side effects as if she were any other patient. She never made eye contact, not once. After the consult, I washed my hands slowly, like I could scrub away what just happened. I skipped lunch and left early, told the department I had paperwork I didn't. The walk back to my temporary housing took 20 minutes, but it felt like I aged a decade with every step. Cars passed, music floated from a taco truck, a boy kicked a soccer ball into a fence. The world didn't stop because she erased me again. I didn't cry, but the silence inside me had weight. That evening, I dropped off medication at my aunt's house. She greeted me with her usual cautious warmth, the kind reserved for people you're proud of in private, but not in front of the family. I stepped inside, placed the bag on the counter, and was about to leave when something on the wall caught my eye. It was a family portrait, framed, glossy new. Delphine, Russell, Silas, Gloria, 2 cousins I barely remembered, and an empty space on the right where an awkward shadow cut across the image. A fern in a ceramic pot now sat in front of that portion, just tall enough to cover where I used to stand. "I didn't know they printed that one," I said. My aunt paused. "It was from Silas's fundraiser. They sent it to everyone." I nodded. She didn't apologize. She didn't have to. On the way back, I thought about all the things they never invited me to: birthdays, barbecues, even Grandpa's funeral. I found out through a forwarded message 2 weeks later. People assume absence is always passive, but sometimes it's engineered. Delphine once told me, "Don't embarrass us in public." I was 16. I'd asked a question at church, something about why women couldn't lead service. She didn't answer. She just gripped my wrist under the pew until it went numb. That line, "Don't embarrass us," has been the cornerstone of her parenting. It wasn't about teaching right from wrong. It was about optics, perception, control. You learn to fill in the blanks when someone ignores you long enough. Your brain builds reasons. Maybe they're busy. Maybe you overreacted. Maybe they'll come around. But after a while, you stop waiting. You stop inventing hope. The next time I stood in front of them, I didn't wait to be introduced. 7 years ago, during one of those unbearable Texas summers, I came home for a brief break between semesters. I'd survived another brutal term at UT Austin and told myself a few quiet days at home wouldn't hurt. I should have known better. Dinner that night was oddly formal: cloth napkins, roast chicken, iced tea, and crystal glasses no one touched. My mother had even lit the tall candles she usually saved for holidays. I should have taken that as a warning. After dessert, Delphine smiled and asked, "Can we talk for a minute, honey?" I followed them into the kitchen. The table was already set, papers fanned out like a job offer, except this wasn't an opportunity. It was a resignation they wanted me to sign. "We've been talking," Delphine began, folding her hands like she was delivering Sunday scripture. "You've been working so hard, and we worry. Maybe medical school isn't the right path. It's so competitive, so stressful. There are other careers, respectable ones, that don't take such a toll." Russell didn't bother softening his tone. "It's not too late to pivot, Maris. There's a 2-year certification program at the community college. Medical assistant. Good hours, benefits. It's practical, woman-friendly." I stared at the form in front of me. It had already been filled out, my name printed neatly at the top. A signature line waited at the bottom, like a trap disguised as an exit. If you choose this route, Delphine said, we'll cover your rent. You can stay home, save money, focus. And if I don't? I asked quietly. Russell didn't blink. Then we can't support choices we don't believe in. You want to chase a pipe dream, you do it without our roof or our help. No yelling, no slammed fists, just a clean, calculated cut. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just stood, my chair scraping against the tile. I walked to my room and began to pack. Delphine followed after a few minutes, pausing at the doorway like she expected me to reconsider. You're really choosing strangers over your own family? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My suitcase was small, but it fit the essentials: 2 sets of scrubs, worn sneakers, and a small cardboard box I kept under my bed. Inside that box were all the things they never cared to display: old certificates, a first-place ribbon from the state science fair, newspaper clippings from the time I was recognized for tutoring underserved students in math. I held each item for a moment, then gently returned them to their place. These were the only pieces of me that ever felt earned. I left the trophies. I left the bedspread Delphine picked out without asking. I left the framed photo on the nightstand, one from middle school, back when they still believed in me. As I walked down the hall, Russell was waiting at the front door. He didn't look angry, just resolute. You don't know what you're walking into, he said. The world doesn't care who you are. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I know, I said. That's why I'll earn who I become. The porch light flickered as I stepped into the night. I didn't look back, not because I didn't want to, but because if I did, I might have hesitated, and I couldn't afford that. The cab pulled up just as I reached the sidewalk. I slid into the back seat, placed my box gently on my lap, and closed the door on the only version of me they ever saw: quiet, obedient, grateful. Even as the miles grew between us, I felt their silence trailing behind like a second shadow I hadn't asked for. They treated it like a phase, like a messy haircut or a poor dating choice I'd outgrow if they just kept the furniture in place and waited long enough. I was still in the house, my name still on the mailbox, my shoes by the back door. But the way they looked through me told a different story. I was already gone in their minds, or rather, I was becoming something too inconvenient to keep. Delphine played her role with smooth calculation. She's just being dramatic, she'd say to any relative who asked why I wasn't eating or joining in. Med school stress. She'll come to her senses. The phrase was always delivered with a smile and a gentle hand wave, like I was a theater student going through an experimental phase, not a woman preparing to leave behind everything I once called home. That weekend, they hosted one of those casual family brunches, small on food, but heavy on performance. Folding chairs on the patio, lukewarm coffee, fruit salad nobody touched. I sat near the edge, next to the plastic cooler full of off-brand sodas, holding a paper plate I never filled. No one sat beside me. It was by design. Silas stood up halfway through and tapped his glass with a fork. Here's to real work, he said, lifting his mimosa. Not everyone's built for it. Some people just love the struggle, I guess. Everyone laughed. Russell snorted. Delphine reached across the table and touched Silas's hand proudly. Not one person turned to look at me, but I felt every glance they didn't give. I didn't respond. I didn't even blink. I just stared at the condensation dripping down my cup until the plastic softened from the heat. Later that day, Delphine cornered me by the kitchen sink as I rinsed my plate, though I hadn't eaten a thing. Well, she said, like we were finishing a casual chat about recipes, if you go through with this, don't expect us to be here waiting when it all comes crashing down. Russell appeared a few moments later and handed me a manila envelope. We did some research, he said, just in case this med school thing doesn't work out. Inside were pamphlets for dental hygienist programs, trade schools, and office administration certificates. He patted my shoulder like he was doing me a favor. Nobody offered me a ride to the bus station. I didn't ask. The morning I left, I stood at the curb with my suitcase and a borrowed duffel bag. The sky was the kind of pale gray that makes everything look too sharp. As I waited for the bus, I thought about how even departure can feel uneventful when everyone assumes you'll be back. But I had no plans to return. Months later, after I'd finished my first year, I remembered the graduation I never got to share. My program didn't have a cap and gown ceremony for year-end benchmarks, so I made one. I printed a card, hand-decorated it with metallic markers from the dollar store, and mailed it to myself. I still keep it. On the inside, I wrote, "To the girl who refused to shrink." There was no applause, no bouquet of roses, no smiling parent behind a camera, but it was mine. I learned something in that silence: how to make a ceremony out of survival, how to turn absence into architecture. The Greyhound station smelled like old coffee, bleach, and resignation. I stood near the vending machines, clutching my suitcase and backpack tighter than necessary, pretending to be more confident than I felt. No one was coming, I knew that. Still, I glanced at the sliding glass doors every few minutes, like some part of me believed someone might change their mind. I'd sent a text to Silas 2 days before, not begging, just asking. "Tuition's due next Friday. I'm a few hundred short, if you could." His response came back within the hour. "Don't embarrass us again. Be realistic." I didn't reply. I didn't cry. I just stared at the message until the words blurred, then hit delete. Not to forget, but to stop giving it power every time I opened my phone. The bus pulled in 15 minutes late. As I climbed the steps, the driver barely glanced up. "No, where you headed?" "No, welcome." Just a swipe of my ticket and a gesture toward the back. I took a window seat, second row from the end, and rested my head against the cold glass. San Antonio slid by in shades of beige and asphalt, strip malls, liquor stores, fading murals. I didn't wave goodbye. I wasn't sure who I'd be waving to anyway. My earbuds weren't playing anything, just there to make people leave me alone. In the white noise hum, I whispered, "You did this." It wasn't dramatic, just fact. The farther we drove, the lighter I felt. Not free, just untethered. Hours later, somewhere outside Lytle, I scrolled through old emails on my cracked screen, trying to stay awake. That's when I saw the subject line from 6 months ago: "Congratulations, partial scholarship offer." I never received it. The email had a response: "Thank you for considering Maris, but she has decided to withdraw. We appreciate the opportunity." It was signed, Delphine. Not even pretending to be me, just her name. Blunt and final. My breath caught, not in shock, just something colder, a click of understanding. She hadn't just wanted me to fail, she made sure I had fewer chances to succeed. Weeks later, during rotations, I met a representative from that very foundation. She smiled, polite, distant. "We were surprised we didn't hear back from you," she said. "We only offer that slot to 2 students nationwide each year." I said nothing, just nodded, like I hadn't just learned someone had slammed a door behind my back while I was still trying to open it. I never confronted Delphine, not out of fear, but because I already knew the script. She'd say it was a mistake. She thought she was helping, that she was trying to protect me from disappointment. It was always about protecting the family name, never protecting me. So I started saving things: screenshots, emails, photos, even printouts I tucked between textbook pages. Not because I needed revenge, but because someday, if the truth ever mattered, I wanted to be able to prove I wasn't crazy. You can't heal a wound while someone keeps gaslighting you that it never happened. Back on the bus, the driver turned on the cabin lights for a stop in Abilene. I didn't get off, just watched as a woman in a worn blazer and 2 noisy teens boarded. They laughed at something one of them whispered. It hit me how long it had been since I'd laughed without checking the room first. I reached into my bag and pulled out the little graduation card I'd mailed to myself. I had no party, no guests, no pictures in front of balloons, but I had that card. To the girl who refused to shrink, I had written. That girl wasn't gone. She was just waiting for me to stop apologizing. I stopped asking them to see me. I decided I'd be seen by the right eyes instead. The call came at 6:42 a.m. while I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, waiting for the kettle to boil. I saw the name flash across the screen: Rachel. We hadn't spoken since our final year in med school, so I almost let it ring out, but something made me pick up. "Hey, have you heard?" She didn't drag it out. "It's Silas. Cardiac arrest. He's in ICU at Methodist San Antonio." I froze. "No, I haven't heard." That's when it landed, like a flat note in an empty concert hall. I hadn't heard because no one told me. Not Delphine, not Russell, not anyone who shared my blood or used to call me baby girl when they needed something. I opened my messages. Nothing. Scrolled through emails. No subject lines that hinted at family. The only new thing from Delphine in months had been a forwarded chain about kidney beans curing migraines. Russell? Just silence. Predictable, solid silence. I called the hospital to confirm. The nurse on duty was polite but guarded. Yes, Silas Broley was admitted. Yes, he was stable but under observation. No, only immediate family was allowed in at the moment. I thanked her and hung up. I booked the first flight out, took one bag, scribbled a sticky note for one of my residents, emergency travel. Call Dr. Chin if anything urgent. I didn't tell anyone else. No long goodbye, just grabbed my phone, my laptop, and a scarf that still smelled like eucalyptus from last winter. On the plane, I stared out the window for so long that my eyes stopped registering the clouds. I wasn't thinking about Silas, not really. I was thinking about the last time I left San Antonio and how I never expected to come back with a name people respected. And yet, here I was, no longer someone trying to prove herself, but someone who had. During my layover in Denver, I pulled out my wallet not for cash, but for something I hadn't looked at in a while. It was a folded printout, creased and fading. Maris, I believe in who you are, not where you came from. You belong in this field. Keep going. Lucienne. Dr. Lucienne Maris, my first clinical supervisor, the only one who ever pulled me aside and said, "You're not loud, but you don't need to be." That message had lived in my wallet for 6 years. I read it during every hard moment, before exams, after failures, after family holidays that never included me. I refolded it, slid it back, and boarded my connection to San Antonio. When I stepped off the plane, the heat hit me like it always did, immediate, personal. I rolled my bag behind me and walked straight past the crowd waiting at arrivals. No one held a sign with my name. No one hugged me like they were glad I came. I took a cab, said the address, and didn't flinch when the driver asked if I was visiting someone sick. I nodded. That was enough. As we passed my old high school, I looked out the window and barely recognized it. The school was the same. I wasn't. The hospital came into view slowly, like something rising from memory. I paid the fare, stepped onto the pavement, and stood still for a second, watching automatic doors open for people who weren't me. I had a badge in my purse that could get me into almost any medical wing in Seattle, but here, I was still the girl who got erased from her own family portrait. I didn't know if I'd go in, but fate didn't wait for me to knock this time. I entered the hospital through the East Wing, quietly, deliberately, like someone who didn't want to be seen until she had to be. The badge on my blazer marked me as a visiting consultant from out of state. The title underneath, Chief Physician, Seattle Region, wasn't bolded. It didn't need to be. The receptionist barely looked up when I asked for Silas Broley's room. She typed something, nodded, and pointed toward a private suite on the 3rd floor. I thanked her and walked away before she could offer any kind of look. Pity, surprise, curiosity. I'd had enough of all of them. The waiting area outside his room was hushed, dim, full of that familiar sterile tension hospitals breathe like second air. Russell sat with his arms crossed, looking like he was ready to give orders to someone, anyone. Delphine was scrolling on her phone. She didn't look up. Neither of them saw me at first. And then, a voice pierced the quiet. "Excuse me, are you the new chief doctor from Seattle?" The nurse was young. Her tone was respectful but loud enough to carry. My name badge hadn't registered with her yet, but my face had, from some conference bulletin or hospital network advisory board. I froze, not because I was unprepared, but because I wasn't expecting to be called out in front of them. Delphine turned. Russell looked up slowly. Silas, hooked to monitors, eyes barely open, shifted his gaze toward me. No one spoke, not even the nurse. For a second, the world hiccuped. No beeps, no chair creaks, just the weight of silence, heavier than any diagnosis I'd ever given. I didn't confirm or deny. I just nodded slightly, then turned to the nurse and asked quietly, "Has his blood pressure stabilized?" "Yes, doctor. It dropped earlier, but we've adjusted." I nodded again and walked towards Silas's bedside, glancing once at the chart. Everything I needed to know clinically was there. The rest? It wasn't my concern. I didn't speak to him. I didn't touch him. I simply documented a few observations on the monitor notes, stepped back, and let the nurse continue her rounds. As I walked back toward the hallway, another voice, softer this time, slipped through the air like a secret. "We had to study your policy paper in my class." I turned slightly. It was the younger nurse from earlier. She was blushing now, like she hadn't meant to say it out loud. "I never knew you were from here," she added. I smiled, small, closed mouth, more for me than her. Delphine heard it. I saw her shoulders go rigid, the phone lowering from her hand. For once, she didn't have a line rehearsed. She didn't know whether to correct the nurse or thank her. She said nothing. I gave the charge nurse my direct line, instructed her to call if Silas's status changed, and that any further updates could go through attending staff. It was routine, efficient, professional. When I turned to leave, no one stopped me. "No, thank you, no, we appreciate you coming." Just that thick silence again, the one they've used for years to drown out anything inconvenient. Truth, talent, me. The automatic doors opened ahead, and I stepped into the hallway. Behind me, I heard Russell's voice, low and hesitant. "You're not staying?" I didn't respond, didn't even flinch. I kept walking. They didn't follow me, but their silence stuck to my heels like wet cement. I didn't expect a voicemail from Delphine. Back at the hotel, still in my scrubs, I just slipped off my shoes and turned on the bedside lamp when the alert popped up on my phone. Her number. One message, 39 seconds. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed play. "Maris? I know you're busy. I wanted to say. I was wrong." The silence that followed lasted longer than the sentence itself. She started to cry, soft, shallow tears that didn't sound like they belonged to grief, just discomfort. "I shouldn't have said the things I did. We didn't know that you'd turn out this way. If you have time tomorrow, maybe we could talk? Just coffee." I listened to it twice, then I set the phone down on the nightstand without saving or deleting it. The next morning, she picked a small coffee shop near the hospital, one with exposed brick walls, overpriced espresso, and a string of indoor succulents. She was already seated when I arrived, her hands folded around a paper cup like it was a prop. "You look well," she said, studying me like I was a stranger in a coat she used to own. I nodded. "Busy, but well." She didn't ask about Silas, or Seattle, or anything real. We danced around neutral topics until she leaned forward, her tone shifting like it had rehearsed itself in front of a mirror. "I just want to thank you for checking on Silas," she said. "He wouldn't say it, but I know he appreciated it. And we were wondering." Here it came. "If there's any chance he could be transferred to your hospital? I mean, you'd have better resources, a smoother recovery, and maybe you could oversee his case a little more closely." I blinked once, then took a slow sip of coffee. "I don't run admissions," I said. "Of course, but with your position, your influence, maybe just a note, a call?" I set the cup down. "Thank you for meeting me," I said, standing. Delphine looked startled, like she hadn't imagined a version of this ending where I got up first. She opened her mouth, but closed it again. I walked out before she found the right closing line. Outside, the air was warmer than I expected. I walked 2 blocks without direction, letting the noise of the city bleed into the cracks she left. That wasn't an apology. That was a transaction in disguise. They weren't sorry they erased me. They were sorry I now had the leverage they didn't control. Back at the hotel, there was a letter waiting in the front desk box. No return address, just a government seal. I opened it in the elevator. It was a formal request, an inquiry about my role as a sponsoring physician on a medical visa application filed by Delphine Broly. She had used my name, my title, my position to vouch for a cousin I hadn't seen since high school, without my knowledge, without my consent. The elevator doors opened. I didn't move. Later that night, I typed a reply, "To whom it may concern, I do not consent to this application. I was not informed nor consulted. Sincerely, Dr. Maris Crane." I printed a copy, signed it, and mailed the original. Then I added a duplicate to my witness file, a folder I'd started years ago. Not for revenge, just for record. There would be no confrontation, no dramatic phone call, just a firm, invisible line they would not cross again. I didn't tell them no, I just let the door close and never unlocked it again. The invitation came folded in blue cardstock, the kind designed to look important without feeling too formal. Pacific Northwest Health Equity Conference, it read. The theme, healing beyond the hospital. I stared at it for a full minute before sliding it into the stack of paperwork on my desk. I hadn't done a conference in nearly a year, not because I wasn't invited, but because I wasn't interested in listening to people talk about systemic empathy while pretending they didn't know what harm looked like up close. Still, I said yes. Maybe it was timing, maybe it was the silence that followed me home from San Antonio, or maybe, deep down, I needed to say something out loud that wasn't just for me anymore. The room was packed, not stadium size, but enough to feel the weight of attention. I kept my tone steady, my delivery deliberate. I didn't name names, didn't drop cities or surnames. I simply said, I used to believe that love would look like support, that the people who raise you will always want the best for you. Then I learned that some only love you when you match the story they've written in their heads. The room stilled. No coughs, no shuffles, just listening. When you start becoming something they didn't author, when you succeed without their permission, it's not always celebrated. Sometimes, it's resented. I paused, let it breathe, then ended with, but survival is also a kind of success. And I stopped asking to be invited to the table when I realized I could build my own. The applause started slow, then it filled the air like a promise. Afterward, a journalist approached me, young, eager, sharp. She asked about follow-up interviews. I gave her my email, non-committal, then disappeared down the back stairs instead of walking through the crowd. That night, an email waited in my inbox. Subject: Thought you should know. It was from Dr. Kaminsky, my undergraduate research advisor. We hadn't spoken in years. Funny thing, he wrote. Came across a grant archive while reviewing applications for the new cohort. One entry caught my eye. An essay, Health Literacy Among First-Gen Communities. Sound familiar? It did. It was submitted by someone named Silas Broley. But I remember I wrote that paper 7 years ago, sent it to him for feedback. I still have the original draft in my files, he added. I leaned back in my chair, blinking slowly. Silas. I remembered the conversation clearly now, him hovering near my desk, asking if I had any ideas for a public health grant, said he just needed a direction. I shared my concept, the outline, even a few paragraphs. He'd asked to see the whole thing, just for structure. He took it, submitted it, won funding, never told me. He used my words, my research, my experience, and passed it off as his own. I didn't respond to the email right away. I just sat with it, let it wash over me like cold water over a sunburn. The betrayal didn't sting so much as settle, familiar, expected. Days later, I delivered another keynote. Smaller audience, more personal setting. Halfway through, I quoted a line from that stolen essay. Access is not just about who gets through the door. It's about who feels safe to speak once they're inside. I didn't explain it. I didn't cite it. I just let it hang there like incense in a quiet chapel. Only a few people in the room would recognize it. One of them might have been watching the live stream, or maybe someone would text him afterward. Either way, it didn't matter, because I knew. And now, so did the world I'd built without his shortcuts. They told the world who I wasn't. Now, I'm showing the world who I've always been. The article wasn't mine, but my name found its way into the comments. I hadn't posted my speech from the conference, didn't link it, didn't tweet a quote or screenshot a standing ovation. Still, a national health blog picked it up, one of those digital magazines that floats between legitimate and viral. They titled the piece, "When Family Doesn't Show Up, She Built Her Own Seat at the Table." I scanned the article once, then closed the tab. But I couldn't stop the comments. They poured in. Some praised the resilience. Every woman in medicine needs to hear this. Others speculated. Wonder who she was really talking about? A few got closer than they should have. Isn't she Silas Broley's sister? That night, as I was preparing a case review for the board, a thick envelope landed in my mail slot. No return address. My name, handwritten on the front in a sharp, all-caps scroll I hadn't seen in years. I already knew what it was. Inside was a local newspaper clipping. The title read, "Silas Broley Receives Community Legacy Award." There was a photo, Silas in a suit, Delphine at his side, both smiling like they'd never held a grudge. Scrawled across the bottom of the page in blue ink, he was still better. No signature, but the handwriting was Russell's. I'd recognized the pointed R and angry tail on the S anywhere. I didn't cry, didn't rage. I folded the paper in half and dropped it into the recycling bin. Around dusk, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, local area code. I hesitated before answering. Maris. It was Delphine. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. I saw the article, she said, breath-catching. I don't want to fight. I just need to ask, if you still have some compassion left, your brother needs you. I said nothing. He's been asking if you're coming back. He won't admit it, but I know he misses you. We all do. Still, I remained quiet. I know we weren't. We didn't say the right things before. But maybe now's the time to show up. For family. For closure. I waited. Let her fill the space with anything that might sound like regret. I'm sorry for how things felt, she said. But you were always so difficult. You made it hard to know how to help. She never said my name. She called me you, my child, that girl, but never Maris. It was like saying it out loud would be an admission, a surrender, proof I existed on my own terms, not theirs. I listened to her breathe, counted the seconds between her sentences. She paused, waiting for a reply. There was none. Eventually, her voice cracked. Are you still there? I didn't hang up, but I didn't answer either. I just let her keep talking until the words turned to static in my mind. Then, gently, I placed the phone down on the kitchen counter, screen still lit. I grabbed my coat, stepped outside, and walked toward the park 3 blocks away. The sky was doing that soft orange fade it does in early fall, and the air smelled like pine and evening promises. I sat on a bench near the tennis courts, letting the city hum carry me. Kids laughed in the distance, a dog barked somewhere, a couple argued over dinner plans. It all sounded more honest than anything I'd heard from Delphine. Their silence had once crushed me, defined me, shaped the choices I made, the voice I muted. Now it was just background noise. Their silence taught me how to speak. The invitation came through a soft-spoken colleague who ran a monthly roundtable for women in medicine. It's small, she said. Just a private dinner. Real talk. No stage, no mics, just stories. After the article and everything that followed, I'd been ducking visibility. Too much applause made me itch. But this wasn't public, it was quiet, close. So, I went. The restaurant was tucked into a converted craftsman house near Capitol Hill, flickering candlelight, low ceilings, smells of roasted rosemary and old wood. As I stepped inside, coats were already hung, laughter already low and familiar. A woman across the table stood up slowly, then smiled. Eliza, she said. It took a second to place her, a cousin on my mother's side. We hadn't seen each other in over a decade. She had the same dark eyes, same unreadable half-smile. I read your piece, she said as we sat down. Didn't know whether to be proud or worried. I tilted my head. Worried for who? She didn't answer that right away. We moved through the meal like strangers remembering how to be cousins. We talked about cities, careers, food. She complimented my necklace. I asked about her daughter. Then came the shift. You know, she said softly, now, I always knew you were different. Not difficult, just too strong for them. I didn't reply. She stirred her tea. They never wanted to admit it, but you scared them. Not in a bad way. You made things move that they wanted to keep still. I still didn't speak. Sometimes silence lets truth breathe. She leaned in. They were afraid you'd make Silas look small, that you'd outgrow their story. And they never expected you to fight back, because they thought you wouldn't. That landed harder than anything Delphine had ever said. I nodded once. Eliza didn't offer an apology, because she didn't need to, but what she gave me, this honest, unvarnished truth, it was something no one else from that side of the family ever dared say out loud. Later, I walked home alone through streets slick with light rain. Eliza's words echoed against the rhythm of my boots, too strong for them. I rolled the phrase over in my mind until it lost its edges. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing to a confession I'd ever get. When I reached my apartment, I hung up my coat, brewed a small cup of chamomile, and sat on the edge of my bed where my old nameplate rested in a drawer. I hadn't looked at it in a while. Dr. Maris Crane, simple, silver, the one I had custom-made the week I was promoted to chief. I ran my fingers over the engraving. My name had never sounded like music to them, but here, etched in steel, it didn't need their recognition to carry weight. They could avoid saying it forever, but someone did. Eliza did. And she meant it. I didn't need to rewrite my story. I just needed them to stop stealing the ending. The summit wasn't about me. That's what I liked most. I sat near the back, blending in with the noise of introductions and the soft rustle of paper programs. My name appeared once, printed discreetly in the acknowledgments. Special thanks to Dr. Maris Crane for her contribution to early equity policy design. No headshot, no title slides. I didn't need them. I watched as younger doctors stepped onto the small stage, women with braids and borrowed blazers, nervous hands gripping index cards. I remembered that feeling, and I was glad to feel it only in memory now. They spoke of structural failures, invisible barriers, and personal scars, each one stronger than the last, each one building something I'd only dreamed was possible when I sat on the outside of tables like these. When my name was eventually called, not to speak but to stand for recognition, I walked up with a calm that felt earned. I wore the coat. It wasn't the pristine white one I wore in hospitals. It was the soft gray version I'd had custom-tailored years ago, Dr. C. Reyes stitched in silver thread over the heart. I didn't change my name. I didn't erase the past, but I rebuilt what it meant. Someone snapped a photo. I shook my head gently when asked if I wanted a copy. This moment doesn't need to be captured, I said. Just remembered. Later, as I made my way through the reception area, a young intern stopped me by the fruit platter. She looked maybe 24, wide-eyed, tentative. I know this is strange, she said, holding her plate like a shield, but I read your paper about family dynamics in healthcare, the one in Westline Review. It felt like you wrote my life. I smiled, not a polite one, but something real. Then keep writing yours, I told her. Louder than I did. She blinked, then nodded, like she'd tuck the sentence in her pocket for later. That night, after changing into an old sweatshirt and making a cup of tea that went cold before I drank it, I opened a notebook, one I hadn't touched in years. It still smelled like leather and ambition. I started writing again, not for publication, not to defend or explain, just to remember. Forgiveness is overrated, I wrote. I chose clarity. I chose distance. And most of all, I chose peace. The next morning, I took the long way to the clinic, walking through the park near the waterfront. Children were posing for family photos under a canopy of golden leaves. Parents fumbled with jackets, yelled names, bribed kids with snacks to sit still. I didn't flinch. I didn't think about the photos I was cropped from, or the ones they never bothered to take. I just smiled. Some stories don't end with grand gestures or perfect timing. They don't end with open arms or a returned call. Some stories end quietly, not because they lack value, but because they finally made it out of the storm. They called me useless, but I built a life that didn't require their permission to matter. Sometimes, the peace we're searching for doesn't come from being heard. It comes from realizing we no longer need to be. I spent years thinking closure would look like an apology, or an invitation, or a seat offered back at a table that never had room for me. But the truth is, closure isn't something they give you. It's something you decide you deserve. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own story, if you've ever been told you were too much or not enough, if your silence was mistaken for weakness, this is your reminder. You are not the problem. You were never the problem. I didn't need their applause to prove I had worth, and neither do you. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever built a life from scratch without the support you thought you'd have? Did this story remind you of someone, or of yourself? Drop a comment with the number 1 if this hit home, or let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't resonate, I still want to hear your thoughts. What didn't connect? What's your story? If you found something here that made you pause, feel, or remember, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. There are more stories ahead, real ones, raw ones, and maybe even one that feels just like yours. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next chapter.